among the various ingredients that go to make up a contract, it is said that consideration is considered to be a very important ingredient. Contract without consideration is void. Unless there is consideration, there cannot be a contract. We have already seen there must be a proposal. Proposal must be accepted. When a proposal is accepted, it becomes a promise. When it is supported by consideration, it becomes an agreement. When an agreement is enforceable at law, it becomes a contract. So we have seen all those things even while explaining the formation of the contract. Now, what about consideration? As applicable to offer and acceptance, there are certain rules which have got to be strictly complied with regard to consideration. So, while forming the consideration, we must observe these rules. Now, what are the rules? Consideration need not be in the form of benefit always. It can also be in the form of detriment. Curry versus Missa. We have already seen the example of a painter who actually is promised some remuneration for his work by the person who wants a picture to be painted by him. So what he says is, look here painter, you paint this picture and give it to me so that I will remunerate you whatever price which you demand. But anyway, you may fix by negotiation with me the price that you demand. So they fix up 500 rupees. Then the artist, you know what he does? He purchases paper, he purchases color pencils, he devotes his time in painting the picture. So liability is incurred. Empty promises unsupported by consideration is not enforceable. But when liability is incurred, then it is always enforceable. That is why it can also be in the form of detriment, namely sufferance. Initial sufferance alone gets you the reward. So, consideration need not be in the form of benefit, it can also be in the form of detriment, sufferance. The next rule is empty promises unsupported by consideration is not enforceable. Empty promises means what? Promise without consideration. Promise without consideration is only an empty promise. So, here, empty promises unsupported by consideration is not enforceable. In Latin it is said, ex nudo pacto non oritur actio. Out of a naked pact, no cause for action arises. In one case, Abdul Aziz versus Mezam Ali Sahib, in that case, a Muslim gentleman wanted to construct a mosque. He approached several well-wishers and several people who are considered to be the strict followers of Muslim religion. So they were approached by these executive authorities meant for constructing the mosque. So they approached and demanded for contribution. Those people promised, yes, I will definitely contribute, sir. They in fact not only promised but also wrote in the book meant for collection of contribution. Then after signing the book, what happened? They actually kept quiet. And this fellow also was keeping quiet for some time. Sometime later he demanded, look here, you see, you have promised to pay the money and all that you are not paying. How can I construct the mosque? When those people, they never replied, he filed a suit. Then the court asked him, look here, no doubt those people have assured or rather promised to contribute for money for the construction of the mosque. But what is it that you have done? No doubt they have promised to pay the money. So in pursuance of the promise given to you, have you incurred any liability? If you have incurred any liability, then of course you can say that you can enforce, because it becomes an agreement. A promise, when it is supported by consideration, becomes an agreement. So that is why even in sale transaction, we first enter into an agreement to sell. So in an agreement to sell, when you advance some earnest deposit, the person who is the owner of the house cannot sell it to anybody whomsoever after having entered into an agreement with you to sell the property. That is why this is what is known as agreement to sell. Agreement to sell is different from sale transaction. So prior to the sale transaction, you enter into an agreement to sell where you pay the earnest deposit by the purchaser to the seller, showing his earnestness in purchasing this property so that the seller need not sell the property to anybody whomsoever. So here, empty promises, that is why we enter into an agreement to sell. Empty promises unsupported by Abdulaziz versus Mesa Mali, merely there was a promise to contribute some money for the construction. But the person to whom the promise was given, he also incurred no liability. He never incurred any liability. That is why it is not enforceable. But this case is distinguished in another case, Kedarnath versus Gauri Muhammad. That is the case where liability incurred in pursuance of promise. Here, empty promises unsupported by consideration. The other one is liability is incurred in pursuance of promise. Kedarnath versus Gauri Muhammad. In that case, a town hall was proposed to be constructed at the city of Howrah. There also a lot of people agreed to contribute sizable sum towards contribution for the construction of the hall. But they never fulfilled their promise. But here, the particular person who wanted the hall to be constructed, he incurred liability in purchasing material, building materials, in engaging the engineer to draw the plan, and incurred out-pocket expense, pro tanto, to that extent. Whatever expense this particular person who wanted to construct the town hall has incurred, that must be reimbursed by the contributors who have promised to make their contribution. So pro tanto means to that extent. So when this gentleman, namely to whom the promise was made to construct the town hall by various contributories, when this fellow filed a suit, the court said this is enforceable. How you say that it is enforceable? Because this chap has incurred liability. He has engaged the engineer to whom he has paid remuneration. He has purchased materials and he has paid for all those materials. So whatever expenses he has incurred, it is in pursuance of the promise by these various persons who have agreed to contribute. That is why it is enforceable. Liability incurred in pursuance of promise is always enforceable. Next, liability incurred not in pursuance of promise, not enforceable. What do you say, sir? Liability incurred in pursuance of promise is enforceable. But liability incurred not in pursuance of promise, not enforceable. When you incur the liability of your own accord, without the other person asking you to incur that liability, how can you expect him to reimburse you? So, here it is not possible. Liability incurred not in pursuance of promise, not enforceable. Arunachala versus Doraisamy. In that case, facts have been succinctly summarized as follows. A village panchayat board consisting of the chairman and the executive members decided to construct a temple for Durga. So they constructed a temple for Durga and they could not finish the tower. And thereupon they asked the inmates of the village to contribute. Then the inmates of the village refused to pay the money. Thereupon the panchayatdar filed a suit. The court said, here is a case where you have constructed the temple out of your own accord. The inmates of the village said, we never asked for the construction of the temple. How can you construct the temple without our asking for it? Therefore, we are not going to pay. The court also agreed with them because the section itself starts, when at the desire of the promisor, the promisee or any other person has done or abstained from doing anything, does or abstains, proposes to do or abstain from doing anything, that is what is known as consideration. So, it must be at the desire of the promisor. Next one is, next important rule is, consideration must move from the promisee. When at the desire of the promisor, the promisee or any other person Any other person is a stranger. We will explain it later. See, there is a promisor, there is a promisee. When at the desire of the promisor, the promisee should have done the job. Then only the promisee can demand for remuneration. So here, consideration must move from the promisee. When consideration moves from a person other than the promisee, it is not enforceable. As I was telling you, consideration must move from the promisee. At the desire of the promisor, the promisee should have done. Or, at the desire of the promisor, any stranger also can be taken into account. Any stranger can also render service, and that too with the desire of the promisor. So, now let us take up this particular principle. The consideration must move from the promisee. To illustrate this point, let me narrate the case of Chennaiya versus Ramaiah. In that particular case, an old woman who happened to be in the verge of her death, she wanted to bequeath the property. But she had an elder sister who also happened to be a dependent sister. So what happened? This lady who had a daughter, he bequeathed the property in favor of the daughter, and with a condition that this gift is made. Any gift with condition is not valid, but she has requested in a recital, in a sort of recital class, requesting her to maintain her elder sister, who happened to be a spinster. So, in Chennaiya versus Ramaiah, a bequeath was made by the old lady to her daughter, requesting her to maintain, to give some money to her elder sister, who also happened to be a spinster, who was a dependent on her. The daughter assured to give money to the elder sister of the donor. Now what happened? Sometime later, when the woman actually expired, the donor died, then she said there is no agreement between the donor and the daughter to pay maintenance charges for the elder sister of the donor. But the court said it is consideration is deemed to have moved from the elder sister, because the consideration is deemed to have moved from the promisee. So both of them were enjoying that property, the common property which was bequeathed in favor of the daughter by both these people, namely the elder sister and the mother of that daughter. See, both of them, they had no issue, because the elder sister happened to be a spinster. So they actually gifted this property with a request to maintain that elder sister. So when that was not fulfilled, then they cannot say that this condition has been enforceable. So you must understand that the entire transaction becomes nullified. Consideration must move from the promisee. It has moved from the promisee in the sense that it is though the mother of that daughter has expired, it is deemed to have moved from the daughter to the elder sister. It is only on that point the gift itself was actually made. Therefore, it was, and furthermore, it happened to be a common property belonging to the donee's mother, donor, and her elder sister. Therefore, in Chennaiya versus Ramaiah, it was enforceable. Consideration must move from the promisee. At this point, I want to explain yet another important aspect. You must know the difference between stranger to a consideration and stranger to a contract. Who is a stranger to a consideration? Stranger to a consideration is a party to a contract. But stranger to a contract is not a party to a contract. That is why there must be privity of contract. Privity of contract means parties to the contract can enforce their rights and obligations against each other. Any person who happened to be not a party to the agreement cannot enforce it. Only party to a contract can enforce the terms of the contract. But who is a stranger to a consideration? And who is a stranger to a contract? How to make the difference between a stranger to a consideration and stranger to a contract? Stranger to a consideration is a party to the contract. Look here, the wording of the section. When at the desire of the promisor, the promisee, or any other person means what? Stranger to a consideration. The best example I can give you is a contract of guarantee. A contract of guarantee is a contract where the surety undertakes to reimburse the creditor in case the principal debtor fails to repay the debt that he owes to the creditor. Now there is a contract between the surety and the creditor, and there is a contract between the creditor and the debtor. There is an implied contract between the surety and the debtor. So you find this aspect, namely stranger to a consideration. Who is a stranger to a consideration? The original contract is only between the surety and the creditor. He is the surety. Now here the creditor gives money to the debtor. Now who is the surety? Surety is a stranger, but he is a party to a contract. It is on account of guarantee that is given by the surety to the creditor that makes the creditor to advance the money to the debtor. Therefore, here the surety is not receiving the money. It is only the principal debtor who receives the money from the creditor. But the surety gives the guarantee. On the faith of the guarantee that is given by the surety, money is advanced by the creditor to the debtor. If the debtor does not pay, surety becomes liable. He is a stranger to a consideration. Stranger to a consideration can always sue the person. See, stranger to a consideration can sue the other party, but not a stranger to a contract. Now, who is a stranger to a contract? Stranger to a consideration I have explained in Chennaya versus Ramaya. But who is a stranger to a contract? A stranger to a contract is one who is not a party to a contract at all. In Dunlop versus Pneumatic Tire Company, the facts have been succinctly summarized in this case as follows. It's a very leading case. Dunlop and Company actually appointed agents to sell its products. Dunlop and Company appointed Dew and Company as its sole selling agent. Sole selling agent means for the entire region. And they gave also a price list. The price list was given by Dunlop Manufacturing Company. Look here, agent, Dew and Company, you should not sell any of our products manufactured less than the listed price. The price which has been stated in the list that is given by us. You should not sell it below that list price. So what happened? Dew entered into a contract with Selfridge & Company. And Selfridge & Company actually sold some of the items that were manufactured by Dunlop & Company, for whom Dew & Company had been appointed as agent, and this Selfridge & Company, who were appointed as sub-agent by the agent Dew & Company. Then what happened? These people, Selfridge & Company, sold some of the articles below the listed price as given by Dunlop & Company. When this was sold below the listed price, Dunlop & Company immediately filed a suit against Selfridge & Company. Then immediately the matter went up to the court. Dew & Company refused to pay this Selfridge & Company, they refused to pay the money to Dunlop & Company. They said, we have nothing to do. There is no privity of contract between Selfridge & Company and Dunlop & Company. Dunlop & Company has appointed Dew & Company. Who is the person who has got to file a suit against Selfridge & Company? Only Dew. Dew & Company should file a suit because Dew & Company has appointed this Selfridge & Company as sub-agent. They alone should take the sub-agent to task when any of the items have been sold less than the price in the list. So, here is a case which says the stranger to a contract cannot file a suit. Only parties to the contract are known as Parties privity to the contract. Privity to the contract means parties to the contract. The second exception comes under the principle doctrine of Estoppel, where a person has promised even to a stranger. A promise has been made to a stranger, admitting and acknowledging his liability, then the person to whom the acknowledgement has been made can file a suit and recover the money. This is what is known as Estoppel under Evidence Act, section 114. So what is 114 and 15 or so? Some of the sections under the Evidence Act, they speak about it. Now, what is Estoppel? Estoppel is where a person has made a representation to another and made the other party to believe such representation. And that person, when he has believed that statement and acted upon it, the person who made the statement earlier cannot revoke it, cannot take back. See, whatever you have represented at one time, because it suits your convenience, cannot be revoked or withdrawn at another time. Whatever you have represented, you have got to stick to it. You cannot retract or you cannot withdraw your representation. So that is what is known as the principle of Estoppel. Whatever you have vomited, you cannot take back. Here vomited in the sense vomited in terms of words and representations. You cannot take back. So here on a principle of Estoppel, where I will explain this. Here is a doctor A. He treats the patient B. And the patient actually remunerate the doctor. Say, look here, doctor, you have done a lot of service for me. I would like. The doctor says, no, you are a poor person. I do not want to receive any remuneration by you. So I don't want to receive any remuneration from you. Therefore, don't bother about remuneration. But however, this patient happens to be a man of principle. Though the doctor refuses to receive the remuneration, this patient is good enough to call the doctor's son and says, look here, your father has not received any remuneration, but of course I would like to pay for your education this much of money. Therefore, please accept it. I am making a promise. I would like to give you this much of money for your education. And he enters into a sort of a contract with the son. Thereupon, what happens when the party, namely the patient, when he does not pay the money as originally promised by him in writing, then the doctor's son files a suit. Now the question arose, who is doctor's son? He is a stranger. How can a stranger enforce the contract? He has not done any service to the patient. It is only the doctor. See, he has only one qualification, namely he is the noble son of an able father. That's all. So he has not done any service, but only the doctor has cured him. Therefore, doctor alone is the fit person to file a suit. But here, the son is able to file a suit because the patient has admitted and acknowledged his liability. I would like to pay thee. So he can enforce it. Words can never go wrong. So he has committed himself that you would like to pay him. This is what is known as Estoppel, where a person has made a representation and such a representation that has been made to the other makes the other person to believe it and act upon it, then the statement that is made by the earlier person cannot be withdrawn. So this is what is known as Estoppel. This is the second exception. Then the third exception is where there is a promise to compensate wholly or in part for any service that has already been voluntarily done and the promisee has been benefited by it, has got to be remunerated. So here, any remuneration that has to be received has been first rejected and the other person who has received the benefit acknowledges his liability to it. As I told you in this example, the son can file a suit. So he has received the benefit. Who has received the benefit? The patient has received the benefit and he has acknowledged that he has received the benefit and admitted his liability not to the doctor but to a third party who happened to be a close relative of the doctor. So this is enforceable. So this is the other exception. Then out of mutual love and affection, where there is a promise made in writing to give a certain sum of money which is based on natural love and affection need not be supported by consideration. Here is a father who wants to bequeath his property in favor of his daughter. Sir, what is the consideration for his love and affection? Love and affection is adequate consideration. So, here this love and affection, that is itself is enough. So, though he is any person who is a beneficiary can file a suit. That will come under the first. The trust also, it will come under that transaction also. So, the next important exception is in the case of contract of guarantee. In a case of contract of guarantee, surety can file a suit. He is a stranger. Who is the party to the transaction? The principal debtor and the creditor. Creditor has given the money to the debtor, but surety is a stranger. He has not received any money, but surety is a party to the contract. Therefore, he can file a suit. A stranger to a consideration, he has not received any money from the creditor. It is only the principal debtor. So, in the case of surety. Third exception speaks about the charge created over immovable property in favor of a Muslim girl. Now, there is a famous case known as Khwaja Muhammad versus Husaini Begum. In that case, the boy's father entered into an agreement with the girl's father. Normally, in Muslim marriages, you have got to pay a certain money known as davar, prompt davar and deferred davar. So, unless the davar is paid, the marriage is not materialized. Therefore, in this case, the boy's father, on behalf of his son, promised the girl to pay a certain amount of money towards davar for the successful conduct of the marriage. The girl also agreed, and a charge was created over the immovable property automatically. In this case, when the father-in-law who has assured to pay the money to the daughter-in-law never paid the dower amount on behalf of his son, naturally the daughter-in-law filed a suit against the father-in-law. Then this has become a charge. Charge means what? It becomes a liability on the property belonging to the father-in-law. So though this girl happens to be a stranger, though the original contract has been made between the girl's father and the boy's father, yet the girl was entitled to enforce the suit because it has actually created a charge over the property of the of the boy's father. The boy's father's property has become subjected to a charge because there is a liability on his part to pay the girl the dower amount as he has originally promised. So, a girl can file a suit in whose favor the charge has been created. The next exception is in the case of maintenance of Hindu woman. Now, though she happens to be a stranger to the contract, yet she can file a suit. Here is a widow who has got two sons. One son gets married to a Bengali, another son to a Punjabi. This woman happens to be a woman with lot of good habits and all that. She is belonging to a community known as Brahmin community. She cannot either live with the Bengali nor with the Punjabi. They are all mutton eaters, non-vegetarians. So this woman happens. So all these two boys who happen to be the son of widow, they entered into an agreement that each of them should pay a certain sum of money to their mother in order to maintain her. So mutually they entered into an agreement. Now what happened? This agreement is only between the sons, but yet the mother happened to be a beneficiary. So though she happened to be a stranger, she can file a suit against the sons for not actually maintaining her, for not sending the maintenance amount. So Shubhammal versus Subramanya. The next important exception is a case where undisclosed principle on whose behalf the agent enters into a contract with third parties. All the contract that is actually entered into by the agent on behalf of the principal with the third parties is enforceable by the principal. Though he happens to be an undisclosed principal, yet he can enforce the contract. Any contract that is entered into by the agent with the third parties on behalf of the principal can enforce by the principal, though he happens to be a stranger to a contract. Likewise, in the case of covenants running with the land, covenants means obligation running with the land. The simple example I can give you is, A is the owner of the property abutting the road, near the side of the road. B is the owner of the property which is behind A's house. Now what happens, if anybody wants to have access to B's house, they have got to pass through the common passage leading through A's house to B's house. So what happens, B sells this property to C. Now C says, you would like to have the common passage. Yes, though he is a stranger to the property, he is stranger to the agreement. That is, in between A and B only originally there has been a covenant and agreement that the B should actually be given access through the common passage to reach his house. But in as much as somebody else, assuming it is D, who has purchased the property of C, who has purchased the property of B, now D will be able to enjoy the common passage because he happens to be the purchaser of property from B, who has originally been enjoying that property. So, access under the Eastmentary Act. So, whoever purchases the property is entitled to enjoy the passage to reach that property. That is the principle. Though A's house is abutting the main road, B's house is actually it remains at the backyard of the A's house, and in order to have passage to B's house, the common passage has got to be used. So whoever purchases from B is entitled, though he happens to be a stranger, he can file a suit. So these are the rules that we have got to observe. Stranger to a contract can also file a suit. Under what circumstances? In the case of trust, the beneficiary can file a suit. In the case of Estoppel, namely on principle of Estoppel, where the promisor has admitted and acknowledged his liability to a stranger, though a stranger is not a party to a contract, yet he can file a suit, as in the case of doctor-patient relationship I pointed out. Then the third important exception is where a charge has been created over an immovable property for the meeting the marriage expenses of a Muslim girl known as Karchi Pandan. Then the fourth exception is in the case of a Hindu woman where she has got to be maintained, she can file a suit for maintenance. And the next exception is in the case of undisclosed principle, though the contract has been entered into by the agent with third parties, yet the principal can file a suit. Next exception, last exception is in the case of assignment of a patent right or copyright, the assignee can file a suit. What is a patent right? A patent has been invented by A. Now, A, after actually inventing the patent, actually assigns that patent in favor of B after receiving some consideration. Supposing somebody else are actually infringing upon the patent right acquired by B from A, B, though he has not invented the patent, can file a suit. Though he is a stranger to a contract, he can definitely file a suit. Likewise, copyrights and all that. So these are the exceptions which you have got to bear in mind.